Hello, everybody. Today is November 25th, 2023. We are in the home of Chikasawa in Washington, D.C. He's more known as Samuel Milkowski. Chikasawa, can you tell us how come Samuel?
Yes, thank you. I was born in Bashid, Banat, in the Vojvodina of Serbia, and we emigrated with my mother and sister in 1927 from Rotterdam to Toronto to meet my father, who had traveled the year before to prepare the way for us. So my name is Sava Mikalachki, and for some reason it was anglicized to Mikulášsky. I am now 100 years old, and I speak Govorim srpski, ali seljački, kao neškolovan banatski lala. I eto, neškolovan znači da padeži padu na sve strane. And I grew up in Toronto and Hamilton, Ontario, and I'll carry the story forward in relation to your questions.
Thank you. So you turned 100 years old last year?
Last January.
Last January.
And this January, I'll be 101, the Lord willing.
101. What's your secret to 100?
Well, the secret to a long life is a loving wife who was a good cook and cared for herself and for me and our 4 children.
Excellent. So you lived, what's your first memory, from Serbia or from Canada?
I don't remember the old country or the overseas trip. What I do remember is meeting my father when we arrived in Toronto. I was then about age 4.5.
Mm-hmm.
It was in August of 1927. He had come the previous year.
How could you compare today's time and age to back then when you were not just your first memories, but the teenage years and in your 20s and...
Well, the difference so far as childhood is concerned is that in those days we played freely on the streets and had all kinds of friends up and down the street. And I remember in Toronto walking down to the piers and going out on the docks, and I wonder that none of us ever drowned or had an accident in that, but we were quite free to wander around that part of Toronto. And I can't remember the first grades of school, but after the Depression of the 1930s, my father moved us from Hamilton to Toronto, where he bought a small shoe repair shop. And that's where we lived and worked. And I finished elementary school there and then started high school. But my father became ill, and I had to quit high school without finishing high school in order to work in the shop with him. And so I was out of school working for several years during World War II. In Canada, military people for service overseas were volunteers. I volunteered for service, but because of a leg injury in childhood from a truck accident, I was not accepted. And so I worked in Canada as a draftsman on weapon design in a government office that controlled small arms production. And after that, a friend who was a Presbyterian minister began teaching me a New Testament Greek and felt that I needed to go to university. And so he approached the registrar at the University of Western Ontario. And even though I had not completed high school, she accepted me as an adult student, and I began my academic career there. And so that academic career extended as follows. First of all, a BA in general arts with theological options, which meant both Greek and Hebrew. And then I stayed on for a master's degree in philosophy. And in the course of that, met Dr. R.K. Harrison, who was a New Testament professor, and he introduced me to the University of London. And I did the honors Bachelor of Divinity degree for the University of London. And then decided that I wanted to do a doctorate. And I didn't want to go through the hoops of various seminars in some doctoral programs. And under what I felt was the Lord's leading, and meeting a clergyman in Toronto who was connected to Oxford, I applied to Mansfield College at the University of Oxford and was accepted to come for doctoral work. And Dr. John Marsh, who was principal then, received me and helped me formulate the title of my discourse. And I wrote a thesis on the work of Christ, the doctrine of the atonement, in relation to the work of three British theologians, and that was accepted, and I received the doctorate in 1958.
Excellent. Do you recollect, you mentioned before you went to school, you worked at a kind of engineering job. Do you recollect any mention of Serbian scientists like Nikola Tesla or Mihailo Pupin at the time?
I don't remember that specifically. I do remember our contact with other Serbian families. We didn't have a Serbian church near us, and so we attended a Baptist church. And that's where a lot of my Christian foundations were formed. The ministry was very rewarding, and I feel happy about the lives that were touched, the young people that were trained on into my later years.
Do you mind sharing with us when you realized there's God and what led you into starting to believe in God?
Well, it was a gradual process from about the age of 13, 14, making a commitment to be a Christian and to follow the Christian way. One factor was a pastor who was a very devout teacher of the scriptures. He was an expository preacher, and he instilled in me a love of the scriptures, and that is what has been a key factor in my own life. I feel that that is very important to any sense of divine guidance in one's life. That is to understand the scriptures, to read and meditate from the Psalms or the Beatitudes. For example, in the Serbian liturgy, the recitation of the Beatitudes, I think, is important, or the recitation of the Oče Naš, the Lord's Prayer, or the recitation of the Confession of Faith, the Nicene Creed. Mm-hmm. These are important factors in the development of faith.
Mm-hmm. Is that when you started believing, is that what pushed you to get into theology as far as education?
It was that, and at university, in arts and theological studies, I felt I had to go on into theological studies more seriously, and Jesse was sympathetic and part of that. So we went to Oxford in 1956 with two small children. Our daughter Catherine and Stephen was just a year old, and we were accepted. The strange thing was that at Oxford you weren't accepted till you got there and they looked at you. And Dr. Marsh was very helpful in getting me settled. And while there, I was under the tutorship for research of Leonard Hodson, who was the Regius Professor of Divinity. And he was very helpful in letting me get on with my work. An interesting anecdote is that once your work is submitted, an examination, oral examination is set, and two examiners are appointed. One of them was an Anglo-Catholic, and the other was John Marsh of my college. And after the exam was over, which didn't last very long, Dr. Marsh telephoned me, and he said, "Sam, do you remember what my colleague said when he began the examination?" I said, "No, I'm too befuddled to remember that." And he said he enjoyed reading your essay. Well, I said, "That was nice. What does that mean?" Well, he said, when he said he enjoyed reading your essay, that's an alpha. That's an A. And he said, "That's all I can tell you." And that indicated that I had passed the exam.
Excellent, great stories. You've also, throughout your life and academic career, you've written several books. The latest one is Guardian Serbs, and we'll talk about it a little bit later. But a lot of our parishioners don't know that you wrote many, many books. Would you like to emphasize any one of them?
Well, the one that is of interest is the one that was titled after our garden in Oceanside. What is the name of that one?
On the patio.
On the patio.
Yes, On the Patio, which is a dialogue among three people: a Christian represented by myself, an idealist philosopher, and an atheist. And in that, I try to set out the traditions of those three schools of thought in relation to Christian faith. Another one is St. Paul and Free Speech, which was released in 2015, and I'm now in the process of getting it republished. And this is an attempt to analyze how the Apostle Paul went about the Roman Empire preaching and teaching freely, and how open that was, how open the society was to hearing him in relation to discussions about free speech today.
Excellent. And your last book, Guardian Serbs, Heritage of Betrayal?
Yes. Guardian Serbs, published 2 years ago, is my account of the Serbian heritage, especially since World War II. And what I feel is of great importance to expatriate Serbs is to understand the heritage that Saint Sava, the patron saint of Serbs, bequeathed to his people. And as I was born in January, that's why I was named Sava, after him. He had a metaphor that freedom is the God-given gift for human nature. And that is a factor from the 13th century on that Serbs should remember. The English have a tradition of the struggle with the king for liberty from the 13th century on, but it is Saint Sava who saw that as the heritage of the ordinary person. And he set out in his document called the Zakon Pravilo, which is really an account of how to set up a nation, the conditions and terms for freedom for the individual, including women and men, and anti-slavery.
Which is amazing for that time, yes.
It is. It's rather amazing for the time. Yes, it is.
You mentioned 7 aspects of suffering in the book, and you name Ottoman Empire, Janitsary, Vatican, Austro-Hungary, Hitler, Tito, and NATO bombing. Can you talk about that a little bit in reference to Christian suffering and how Christianity looks at it?
Yes, in the book, I'm deeply troubled that the Serbian contribution to the Western Allies during 2 world wars has been largely forgotten. They, as a nation, lost more per capita of the civilian population than most any other nation in Europe. But in the Second World War, there is the story of how flyers who were brought down in flying over Serbia when they flew from Italy to bomb the oil fields in Romania, they were shot down over Serbia, and how over 500 of them were rescued by Serbian families. And that has been largely forgotten or set aside. Now, when Tito took over and the Allies turned their support away from Draža Mihailović to Tito, that sealed the fate of Serbs under a communist regime for a long time. But after Tito died, the nation began to fall apart, and that resulted in the breakup of what was Yugoslavia and the tension between Milosevic and the West.
So all this suffering, can you put it from your theological background? Can you explain why do people suffer through wars, and in this case, all the way back to Turks and even before that?
I can't express a rationale for it, except to say that human beings are prone to sinful behavior and to the working of evil. And why it is that human beings can be so cruel to one another is something that is deeply puzzling and worrying. I don't know what can be said about that in certain places of tension in the world. In the case of the Balkans, it goes back a long way and to the tensions between the Vatican and leaders in the Vatican and the Serbian Orthodox Church. And that tension continues to the present day. The worrying part has been that the Vatican during World War II tended to favor the reactionary groups. And after the war, there was created what's called the rat line, when numbers of wartime criminals were facilitated to escape to South America and to other places. These are aspects of human behavior which are difficult to account for. And I don't know that a rational explanation is possible, except to say just a proneness to do that which is wrong.
That's right. That's right. What's interesting to me is that after the Second World War, it took about 30 years for people to forget it, for not necessarily forget, but forgive. It's known that German tourists were coming to Yugoslavia without any problems and no hard feelings.
Yeah.
After this war in the 90s that happened to in Bosnia, Croatia, Kosovo, all that, it seems that even after 30 years, there's no even a sight of reconciliation. What's your take on that?
I find that to be deeply troubling. There is a personal element involved in this in regard to the 90s when the struggle against the Serbs occurred from the West. And Madeleine Albright was involved in that. Now, she as a child and her father, who was a Czech diplomat, were rescued by a Serbian diplomat. Otherwise, they would have been shipped by the Nazis to Auschwitz because they were of Jewish background. And why her personal animosity towards Serbs persisted is to me a mystery. I don't know. But in regard to Kosovo, people in the West fail to realize that what Canterbury is to the English and what the Islamic centers in Saudi Arabia and elsewhere are to Muslims, Kosovo is to Serbs. There are more churches, monasteries, cemeteries, and other Christian symbols in Kosovo per square mile than anywhere on earth. And that needs to be remembered, but it is largely ignored now, yes. And what will happen about Kosovo down the road is hard to imagine, hard to calculate.
So, how do you see what's left of Serbia and Serbs in Bosnia? How do you see them becoming maybe one big Serbia one day? What would you recommend to Serbs as a nation to do in order to get stronger?
To me, the main issue for that to happen are cultural factors. First, a tolerance in regard to religious matters, that the Orthodox be treated fairly and humanely. But further, that cultural aspects of each of their heritage should shine out and be appreciated. And a great deal of that is in the music and the folk songs. Serbian and Croatian, Dalmatian, and other love songs are among the loveliest in the world. And Many of these are translated to people on YouTube and in other ways. And these cultural aspects of music and traditional dances and so forth can be ways in which families at the local level interact and appreciate each other's culture.
Your mother was a good folk dancer, is that correct?
Yes, she was. She was. She was one of the best dancers in the village. Yes, yes.
Did she get to practice that in Toronto when you moved to Canada?
No, her life in Toronto was actually very sad. She often wept for what she had left behind in the village in Serbia. Yes. Now, the blessing of my life was Jessie, my dear wife, who died 5 years ago. We had met in a young people's group in London, Ontario, in a church group. And I remember very distinctly one evening when the young people's meeting was being held of about 100 young people. And she was asked to come up and give an announcement. And this beautiful young lady went up front, dressed in a green suit. And I looked at her and I said, "That's for me." And afterwards, I went up and reintroduced myself because we had known each other. And after that, I asked her for a date. And from then on, we came to know each other, love each other. And the next year, we were married. That was in 1950. And we were married for 68 years. And we have 4 children. The eldest was Catherine, and then Stephen, and Anne, and Helen, and a number of grandchildren, all doing well.
Excellent. So you were basically religious and in faith your whole life.
Yes, specifically the Christian influence on me strongest was from about the age of 13. And that is what molded and shaped my life and my outlook. And then after that, it was that Presbyterian minister who tried to teach me Greek and introduced me to university. And it was at university that my career path was set. I was able to win scholarships at university and prizes. I think I won the university-wide public speaking contest, plus other things. And it was there that my sense of theological commitment and theological vocation were formed, along with a strong interest in the history of philosophy, and I loved the study of the classical philosophers, from the pre-Socratics through Socrates and Plato, Aristotle, the Stoics and the Epicureans and so on. Those became particular interests, and they were important in shaping my outlook in theological study.
So through in the colleges where you from Presbyterian, you levitated toward Baptist, and you spend your...
Well, the Presbyterian minister, that was an individual relationship, not a denominational one. And we attended a Baptist church because that was near where we lived, and there wasn't a Serbian church. Yeah.
Can you tell us the differences between the two churches? Are there many? The Orthodox and Baptist?
Well, the main confessionally, they are identical in regard to the respect for the scriptures and the creeds. The differences are in regard to leadership and heritage. And in that regard, they are parallel. That is, if one thinks of the liturgy of the Serbian Church each Sunday, the elements in it that are really important to people are the recitation of the Lord's Prayer, the recitation of the Beatitudes, the recitation of the Nicene Creed, along with the music. These are all parallel to the faith of all Christians.
So, all you experienced, do you mind sharing with us some of the events in your life where you felt God's presence?
Yes, the most crucial one for me was after university studies at the University of Western Ontario. I was torn as to what to do about doctoral studies and the implication of that for vocation. What was I going to do with my life? And it was then that the contact with a person in Toronto who had been an Oxford graduate was crucial. And I felt that that was providential because he opened the door by means of a personal contact for me to write to the principal of Mansfield College in Oxford to see whether I could be accepted for study there. And that I felt was providential.
Do you have any other ones you would like to share?
Well, the other is the blessing of my marriage and Jesse and our family and children. One felt that one's children were God's gift, and one had by example and by training to try to be a mentor and try to be an educator and a facilitator for those lives. Those I felt were key factors in one's life.
As far as I really love listening and asking, even though you don't necessarily fit in the following category, converts, somebody coming from a different faith to Orthodoxy.
Yeah.
I love asking them their love story, their life story, and how they got what pushed them to it. And you.
Well, you see, I have never.
Mhm.
My Serbian heritage, it was not something I ever rejected or renounced. And so when we came to the church here, to Father Vasile and the Serbian church here in Washington, I just felt there was a continuity. And Bishop Iride has been a blessed figure in my life. He has been so affirming and sort of confirming and reconfirming all that God had meant in my life and in my ministry. And so that amounted to a continuity rather than a contrast. And that's what I feel about the present ministry in our church at St. Luke's. And Father Vasile and the ministry that he gives to us all.
Thank you for sharing. You in your book you mentioned special connections we as Serbs have to God. The one expert I liked was about the language, how Serbs speak to God in the personal level. Can you explain that?
Yes, as all Serbs know, there are ways of addressing one another. And if I say T, that is the familiar you. If I say V, that is the formal honorific. And if you're being introduced to someone of a higher status or who is a stranger, you would use the honorific V. If you're talking to a family member, you would say T, and that's very familiar. And religiously, it's interesting that in Serbian speech, when we speak to God or about God, we use the familiar T, which is lovely, which is really very nice. It's like saying Father, yes.
Because other cultures don't have that.
They don't have that distinction
Mhm.
in the language, yes. And the other feature of the Serbian heritage is the Slava, where families honor a patron saint annually, and it reminds them of their Christian heritage. Here in Washington, I have felt a particular connection and encouragement in the way in which the people at St. Luke's Church have befriended me, and I have become part of what is an extended family. And there are two young ladies in the church, Milica Tosic and Jelena Tosic. Milica now married, and they adopted me as their Washington grandfather, which is just lovely.
Lovely. Some historian wrote, he said back in the, so we're looking at centuries ago, he says, when I go to Constantinople, I'm very careful not to speak and say to anybody that I'm a foreigner, because if they hear that I'm a guest, then they try to all take me to their home and host them. That's part of Christianity in general, to welcome somebody. So
yes, it is to be very generous, and also to be very loyal. Like during the Second World War, the Allied flyers who were rescued and hidden by the Serbian families, there was not one betrayal of those 500 people who were rescued. It's really quite a remarkable story. There's a strong sense of loyalty.
and it's worth repeating. Do you mind if we hear it from your mouth? It's worth repeating so more people can hear it. Do you mind telling us the story about the Operation Halyard?
Yes, the success of the Allied cause depended in part on trying to limit German access to oil for gasoline. And the Romanian oil fields were a very important source of that oil. And so attacking those fields by flying from Italy after Italy was taken was important. But planes were shot down or disabled and came down over Serbia and Croatia. And scores and scores of flyers were rescued. In fact, about 500. And they were hidden by Serbian families and villagers in the forests, but mostly in the homes, in barns, in attics. And toward in the third year of the war, a program was initiated by some Serbian American military personnel who were part of the American forces in Italy to rescue those flyers. And they flew planes to an improvised runway that the Serbs villagers had created up in the mountains. And from there, with regular flights, 500 were rescued and brought to Italy from Serbia, which is a rather amazing story.
And was it organized by, who was it organized, the rescue?
Well, it was organized by on the American side, it was organized by the American command, local command.
On the Serbian?
And on the Serbian side, it was simply the Serbian villagers.
Mhm. Was it partisans or was it?
It was not partisans. It was people more loyal to the Delaja Mihailovic movement.
Mhm.
Yes.
You actually also professionally had some work in China, communist China, basically. Can you talk about that?
Yes, I wrote a book, Letters to China, which is my encouragement of Chinese Christians in their faith. This came out of my relationship with Ned Graham. When I taught for Fuller Theological Seminary, after retiring from the presidency of the University of New Brunswick, I moved to British Columbia, to Vancouver area, and began teaching as an adjunct professor for Fuller Theological Seminary in various places. And in my trips to lecture in the Seattle area, one of my students was Ned Graham. And Ned Graham was Billy Graham's younger son. And he became a friend. And in fact, one of their sons is named Sam after me, Sam Graham. And Ned, he became interested in the work of Christians, the faith, and the activities of Christian congregations in China. Partly, or importantly, because his mother had been a child of missionaries in China. And that was the link he had with China. And so he leads an organization that tries to help Christian churches in China, the house churches in China. And so that's why I wrote that book, Letters to China.
And you had a chance to visit?
I was not able to visit those churches, but some years, in those years, the American Philosophical Association arranged a visit by professors from American philosophical faculties to visit China. And my wife and I joined that group. There were about 80 or 90 of us. And we were invited to 5 universities in China and went there and were hosted and had dialogue with them. And afterwards, we flew to Taiwan for a visit.
Can you talk about your wife? What were her interests? How was she helping you
Well,
in general?
Jessie was of Scottish American background in Ontario. Interestingly, Jessie's father, Garnet Bain, her family name was Bain, B-A-I-N, and he was a cheddar cheese maker. He became famous as Canada's premier cheddar cheese maker and won many awards in international competitions for his cheese. And when I met Jessie, this was in London, Ontario, where I had started university. He was then an inspector for the Ontario government on cheese manufacture production in Ontario. And that's where I met Jessie. And he was prominent in the cheese-making industry. Regarding Jessie's background, I mentioned that her father had been a very well-known cheesemaker. Well, after we got engaged and married and began our family, she became the backbone emotionally of my life and of my ministry. Of our 4 children, Catherine, we sent them to England for schooling, to a residential school, Millfield School. And Catherine went on to Oxford, and there she met Peter, who was English and a specialist in Japanese studies. Anne met at the University of South Dakota, met Gary, who was an expert in American literature, and Stephen graduated from Sioux Falls College and decided on a Marine Corps career. And early in his career, he was part of the unit in Beirut in 1983, where the barracks were blown up. He survived and had a distinguished career, retiring as a colonel. And Helen graduated from a college in Sioux Falls and married Tom, and they are in business factoring manufactured chairs in quantity for hotels and restaurants. And so Jessie, as a mother, we tried to raise and educate our children to be effective in their chosen fields, vocation and work. Our marriage lasted for 68 years, and she died in 2018. And I moved to the home of our son, Stephen, and his wife, Jackie, in Washington, D.C. And that's where I came to know the Serbian Church and Father Vasile.
You also helped one college in Canada.
Yes. Before retirement, I became president of a small junior college in Moncton, New Brunswick. This was a 2-year college that prepared people for the 3rd year of university. And there were ramshackle buildings, very difficult to maintain. It had been founded originally as a school, residential school, for the children of farmers who didn't have high schools near them, and sent them there. And when I became president, there were about 150 students, but an excellent academic program and a strong, competent faculty. And I took that over and began a process of enlargement. It was extraordinarily difficult because the buildings were in bad shape, and we had all sorts of mechanical problems with the buildings. I felt that the college had no future unless it became a degree-granting institution in its own right. But in Canada, the granting of degrees is not the prerogative of an association of universities. It's the prerogative of the government of each province. And so I prepared a dossier and managed an appointment with the Premier of New Brunswick, Premier Hatfield. He received me graciously and listened to my proposal. And after he had heard everything, he said, I'll put it through. And he put the bill through the legislature to make of it a 4-year degree-granting institution. The name was changed. It is now Crandall University. It has a new campus and 1,500 students, many drawn from other parts of the world, with an excellent faculty and excellent academic programs. I began a music program, I began an education program and a business program, and these things have all gone on. So I'm very pleased and very proud of that accomplishment.
Congratulations. I'm so sure many kids are happy
Yeah.
and thankful to you.
So they now have master's level programs in the university as well as the first degree programs.
That was such a
Yes.
crown on a very rich career
Yes.
of yours. Well, there's some other things you would like to share with us that I haven't particularly asked you.
The main one is that I hope that young people of Serbian families would take the trouble to learn about their heritage in several respects. First of all, cultural aspects of music and dancing and literature, but especially in regard to the Christian faith and the liturgy each Sunday. While for many young people it may seem tedious because it's so long, it's important to correlate that liturgy with the teaching of the scriptures and the strengthening of faith. And I would urge them to do that because the heritage that goes back to the Zákon o Pravilo of Svätý Sava, of Saint Sava, is important as one of the early creations of a Western democratic tradition. And that's something that Serbs could be very proud of.
Serbs wrote in the 13th century, whatever slave comes across Serbian land becomes free.
It was 1218 or so that he wrote that. It's rather an amazing story. Well, that is something that I think I would like to urge upon families and upon Serbian young people. The learning of the language is another matter. As I said at the beginning, I'm a kind of unschooled elderly Serb, neškolovan banatski lala. And if possible, the learning of the language and its cultural traditions is important.
You learned it at home with your parents, right?
I learned it at home, yes. It was village Serbian in the home, yes. Yeah.
Mine's not much better.
Well, thank you so much for this.
Thank you, Chika-san.
Yes. Bachelor of Arts at the University of Western Ontario when I got started in university studies. And then I stayed on for the Master of Arts program in philosophy. And the University of London honors degree in divinity, the Bachelor of Divinity is there, and the honors level had to include both Greek and Hebrew. And then these others that is a declaration from Atlantic Baptist University, which became Crandall University. That's the college in Moncton, New Brunswick, as a tribute to the work I had done there, including this recognition here as well. Which is, I was given the honorary doctorate of Acadia University. Acadia Divinity College in Nova Scotia is the college of the university that founded the university, which gave me the honorary doctorate. So, and this one is the University of Oxford doctoral diploma for the research I did that I mentioned in my essay. So that's the significance of these.
Great, thank you.
Here is Jesse and myself. And
Roughly what year?
pardon?
Roughly what year?
That, I would say, about 1990.
Yeah. Maybe a little after that.
Yeah.
Because that was after this was taken in Oceanside at Ocean Hills.
Yeah, so it would have been about,
And they took annual photos, so it might have been 95, 94,
yeah,
somewhere in there.
I'd say 96 to 98, something like that.
Uh-huh.
Yes.
Actually, it was probably after you came back from Arizona for that
Yes.
trip, because that
Yes.
looks like a...
Yes. That's true.
Yeah.
That's Jesse and me with the newspaper in Vancouver, picture of Stephen when we found out that he had survived the blast.
Yeah,
Beirut.
it was 3 days after.
Yes. Uh, yeah. This is my sister and me in Toronto about a year or two after we emigrated from Serbia, which would have been around 1928 or so. And she wouldn't stand still, and the photographer was annoyed. But she wouldn't stand still because I was pinching her.
That's a good story.
These are the 4 children. Yes, when they were younger.
So you were wearing glasses, Stephen, your whole life.
Well, actually, no. I didn't wear them for 20 years.
Catherine and Stephen and Anne and Helen. Yes.
Yeah, well,
Cute.
When was that taken? That was taken in Calgary, wasn't it?
I think that was that might have been taken in England. In was that in maybe in Cote when we were living there?
No, I think
That's about the age.
yes.
So it'd been I think.
Okay.
Excellent.
My photo with the Oxford DPhil gown.
'56 or 50,
Not 58.
58.
Yeah.